Okay, so imagine this. You're like, you're at the controls of a runaway trolley.
Right, hurtling down the tracks.
Yeah, really fast, like 60 miles an hour. And ahead, you see 5 workers on the main track. Your brakes are completely shot.
Totally gone.
And, if you hit those 5 workers, well, they'll all die. It's unavoidable on that path.
But then you spot something.
Exactly. You suddenly notice a side track off to the right, and there's just one worker on that track.
And crucially, your steering still works.
Your steering works. What do you do? What's the right thing to do? Do you turn the trolley onto the side track? You'd kill 1 person, but you'd save 5.
It's probably the most famous thought experiment in this area, isn't it? It just throws you right into the deep end of moral philosophy.
It really does. Forces you to confront your gut reaction to an impossible choice. And that's what we're doing here on The Deep Dive. We take fascinating sources today. It's the opening lectures from a really well-known university course on justice. And we, pull out the key insights for you.
Our mission today is really to unpack these fundamental moral ideas, see how our intuitions clash when things get tough.
Right, like with the trolley.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we'll look at how these abstract concepts play out in a truly shocking real-life story.
Consider this your shortcut to understanding the core arguments in ethical decision-making and hopefully what they might mean for you.
Okay.
So let's go back to that first trolley dilemma. You're the driver. In the course, when students face that choice, turn and kill 1 or don't turn and kill 5, what do most people say?
Oh, the vast majority overwhelmingly say they would turn the trolley.
And the reason?
It's pretty straightforward consequentialist logic, really. They say, look, it can't be right to kill 5 people when you can kill only 1 person instead. Save more lives.
Seems logical on the surface.
Some students even bring up the 9/11 comparison, arguing it was better to down the planes than let them hit buildings with potentially thousands inside. It's that same kind of calculation.
The greater good, essentially. Better that 1 dies so 5 can live.
That seems to be the operating principle for most people in that first scenario.
But not everyone agrees. You mentioned a minority view.
Right. A few students wouldn't turn. And their concern is quite profound. They worry that this kind of thinking, this calculation, well, they say it's the mentality that justifies genocide and totalitarianism.
Wow. Okay. That raises the stakes considerably. Does the course sort of address how you counter that, or is that just the inherent tension?
That's a huge part of the ongoing philosophical debate, definitely. But what's really striking in these opening lectures is how quickly our gut feelings can flip just by changing the scenario slightly.
Okay, how so?
Consider the next version, the fat man on the bridge scenario. Now, you're not the driver anymore. You're just an onlooker standing on a bridge overlooking the track. You see the trolley hurtling towards the 5 workers. You can't stop it directly, but next to you, leaning over the railing, is a very large man, a very fat man.
Okay. I think I see where this is going.
You realize that if you were to, give him a push, his bulk is large enough that he would fall onto the track, stop the trolley, and save the 5 workers. But of course, he would die.
Right. So do people say they'd push him? Applying that same 1 versus 5 logic.
Almost no one says they would push him. The intuition flips dramatically.
Whoa. Okay, so what happened? What happened to that principle? Better that 1 should die so that 5 should live. Why does it suddenly seem wrong here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That's what these dilemmas force us to examine. People try to explain the difference.
Yeah. What do they say?
Well, one common attempt is to say pushing the man is an active choice. It's a direct act of murder, almost. Whereas turn the steering wheel of the trolley feels different. Less direct, maybe, like you're redirecting a threat that already exists.
Okay. Active versus passive, maybe?
Sort of. Another angle people try is the idea of involvement. They argue the single worker on the side track was, in a way, already part of the situation, already on a track. But the man on the bridge, he's just an innocent bystander. Pushing him feels like actively choosing to involve someone who is completely outside the danger zone.
But hang on. The worker on the side track didn't choose to be involved any more than the fat man did, right? They were just there.
It feels a bit like we're grasping for reasons to justify a very strong gut feeling.
I think that's a very fair point. Are these distinctions real moral differences, or are they, as you say, perhaps rationalizations for an intuition that maybe defies simple calculation?
Does changing the way you involve the fat man make a difference? Like, what if there's no pushing involved?
Yes, the trapdoor variant. What if you're not pushing him, but you're standing next to a lever or a steering wheel that operates a trapdoor right under the fat man? Would you turn that wheel?
Still feels pretty bad.
For many, yes. It still feels more wrong than turning the trolley onto the sidetrack, even though the action is just turning a wheel in both cases, and the outcome is 1 dead, 5 saved. So it seems like the act itself, the directness of causing that specific person's death, carries enormous moral weight, separate from just the numbers.
You've nailed it. Our moral intuition seems sensitive not just to consequences, but to the nature of the act itself. And the Course pushes this further with medical examples.
Okay, like what?
Imagine you're an ER doctor. A terrible trolley accident happens nearby. 6 patients are rushed in. 5 have moderate injuries. 1 is critically injured. You could spend all your time and resources on the one critical patient. Really focus on him. But if you do that, the other 5 will die.
Whoa.
Or you could focus on the 5, treat their moderate injuries, save all of them. But while you're doing that, the one severely injured patient will die.
Okay, in that case, I'm guessing most people go with saving the 5. The triage logic seems to apply there.
Exactly. The 1 versus 5 calculation feels right again in that context for most people. Save the greater number.
But I sense there's another shoe about to drop.
There is. The transplant surgeon scenario. Now, you're a brilliant transplant surgeon. You have 5 patients, each needing a different organ transplant: heart, lung, kidney, liver, pancreas. Without these organs, they will all die very soon.
Dire situation. No donors available.
No donors. You're watching them fade. Then, you remember, in the next room, there's a perfectly healthy guy who just came in for a routine checkup. He's maybe taking a little nap on the examining table.
Oh no, don't tell me.
You realize you could, very quietly, tiptoe in there and, well, harvest his 5 healthy organs. He would die, of course.
But you could save the 5 patients.
You could save the 5. Would you do it?
Absolutely not. No way. That feels completely, utterly wrong.
And that's the near universal reaction. Almost nobody thinks it's okay to sacrifice the healthy person, even to save 5 lives.
That's just fundamentally different.
Someone in the Course apparently suggested taking a needed organ from one of the 5 dying patients to save the others, which, as the lecturer noted, kind of wrecks the philosophical point, but shows how strong the aversion is.
Huh. Yeah, I can see the desperation to find some way out that doesn't involve killing the innocent bystander.
Subscribe.
Okay, so summing this up, our reactions seem to be pulling us in 2 different directions.
That's exactly what these thought experiments are designed to reveal. They expose 2 fundamentally different ways of thinking about morality, 2 distinct frameworks.
What are they?
The first is what philosophers call consequentialist moral reasoning.
Consequentialist. Meaning it focuses on that consequences.
Precisely. It locates morality in the consequences of your actions. In the state of the world, that will result from what you do. The right choice is the one that produces the best overall outcome.
Like saving 5 lives instead of 1.
Exactly. And the most famous version of this is utilitarianism, developed by the 18th century English philosopher Jeremy Bentham.
Bentham, okay. What was his core idea?
Bentham argued that we are all governed by 2 sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. They dictate everything we do. So morality, he said, should be about maximizing the balance of pleasure over pain or happiness over suffering for everyone affected.
Maximize utility, the greatest good for the greatest number.
That's the utilitarian motto. So the trolley driver turning the wheel or the ER doc saving the 5, they're acting like intuitive utilitarians.
Okay, that makes sense for why we sometimes choose the numbers. But what about the hesitation? Pushing the fat man, the transplant surgeon, that points to something else.
It does. It points towards categorical moral reasoning.
Categorical.
Meaning that morality isn't just about consequences, it's about the intrinsic quality of the act itself. It suggests there are certain absolute moral requirements, certain duties, certain rights that we should respect regardless of the outcome.
So some actions are just wrong in themselves, even if they lead to a good result.
That's the idea. Our powerful intuition that it's just categorically wrong to kill an innocent person, even to save 5 others, comes from this way of thinking.
And is there a key philosopher associated with this view?
Yes. The most important proponent of categorical moral reasoning is another 18th century giant, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant.
Kant. Okay, Bentham and Kant. Consequentialist versus categorical, these seem like the 2 big opposing ideas emerging here.
They are fundamental tensions in moral philosophy, and we'll definitely be digging deeper into both throughout our deep dives.
Right. Now, these trolley problems, they're useful hypotheticals, but you mentioned a real-life case that puts these principles to the ultimate test.
Yes, a truly harrowing story. It's a famous 19th century British law case called the Queen versus Dudley and Stevens.
What happened?
It involved a yacht, the Mignonette, which sank in the South Atlantic about 1,300 miles from the nearest land, the Cape of Good Hope.
Wow, stranded.
Totally. 4 crew members managed to escape into a small lifeboat. Captain Tom Dudley, first mate Edwin Stevens, able seaman Edmund Brooks, and a 17-year-old cabin boy named Richard Parker.
Just a kid, really.
Yeah, he was an orphan on his very first long sea voyage. Apparently, his friends had told him the trip would make a man of him.
Oh, that's just tragic already. What supplies did they have?
Almost nothing. Just 2 small cans of turnips, no fresh water.
That's grim.
After days adrift, starving, dehydrated. The young cabin boy, Parker, made the mistake of drinking seawater. He became very ill, and it looked like he was dying.
Oh, no.
By the 19th day at sea, things were desperate. Captain Dudley proposed drawing lots, a lottery, to decide who should be killed so the others could eat and drink his blood to survive.
A lottery. Did they agree?
Brooks, the sailor, refused outright. He wouldn't consent to it.
So, no lottery. What then?
The next day, the 20th day, there was still no rescue ship in sight. Parker was lying in the bottom of the boat, basically unconscious. Dudley told Brooks to look away.
Oh, I don't like where this is going.
And then, apparently with Stevens nodding in agreement, Dudley took out his penknife and killed Richard Parker, stabbing him in the jugular vein.
Oh, my God.
For the next 4 days, the 3 survivors, Dudley, Stevens, and Brooks, fed on the body and blood of the cabin boy.
And were they rescued?
Yes, eventually a ship picked them up. They were taken back to Falmouth in England. But when they told their story, they were arrested and put on trial for murder.
What was their defense?
Their defense was basically one of necessity. They argued, in effect, that it was necessary to kill one person so that 3 could survive. It's that same utilitarian logic again, isn't it? Better that 1 should die.
So that 3 should live, but the prosecution...
The prosecution took a harder line. They simply argued, murder is murder. Categorical.
Wow. Okay, so back in the classroom, when students are presented with this case and asked to be the jury, was what Dudley and Stevens did morally permissible? What's the verdict?
Again, a clear majority, though maybe not quite as overwhelming as the first trolley case, voted guilty.
Subscribe.
They felt what the men did was morally wrong.
But there was a minority who defended them.
Yes. Some argue that while what they did was, morally reprehensible, the extreme necessity of the situation could exonerate you from any guilt. They echoed that sentiment. You have to do what you have to do to survive.
Survival instinct overriding moral rules.
Some even tried to push the utilitarian argument further, suggesting maybe, just maybe, if Dudley and Stevens went on to live productive lives, maybe started charities.
Oh, come on.
That their survival would ultimately benefit society more, outweighing the wrong of the killing. It's a tough argument to make stick, though.
Yeah, that feels like a real stretch. It's almost unbearable to judge them without having been in that lifeboat, but what were the arguments from the majority, those who said it was wrong?
The core objection, stated very powerfully by one student, was that there is no situation that would allow human beings to take the idea of fate or the other people's lives into their own hands. A very categorical stance.
No playing God, essentially.
Right. But then the questions get trickier. What if Dudley had asked Parker for his consent for killing him?
Would that change things?
Some students felt it might. If Parker himself had, say, suggested the sacrifice, taken ownership of the idea, perhaps it could be justified. But many others disagreed strongly.
Why? What were their reasons?
Some cited the inherent wrongness of cannibalism regardless of consent. Others pointed out that rescue wasn't certain anyway. Maybe they killed him for nothing. Consent didn't automatically make it right for everyone.
Okay, what about the lottery idea that Brooks rejected? If they had all agreed to a lottery beforehand and Parker just happened to lose fair and square, would that have made it morally permissible?
Now that's interesting. Significantly more students felt that a lottery they had all agreed to would make this subsequent killing morally justifiable, or at least more permissible than just deciding to kill the weakest one.
Why the difference? The outcome is the same. Parker still dies.
The argument seemed to be about fairness and consent to a procedure. A lottery removes the element of Dudley and Stevens deciding that their lives were more valuable than Parker's. It introduces a kind of due process. Everyone agrees in advance that someone might have to die, and chance decides who. It's like they all consented to the risk.
So the procedure itself seems to do some moral work, even if the result is death. That's fascinating and kind of disturbing.
It really is. It highlights how much weight we sometimes give to fairness and agreement, even in the most extreme situations. But even then, some students held firm.
The hardcore categorical view.
Exactly. For them, even with a fair lottery, even with consent, murder is murder. Full stop. They argued it didn't matter if it saved 3 lives or 300 or 3,000. Bentham's idea of adding up happiness or lives saved just doesn't apply when you cross that line of intentionally killing an innocent person.
So the Dudley and Stevens case just leaves us with more incredibly tough questions, doesn't it?
It really crystallizes them. If murder is categorically wrong, why? Where do fundamental rights, like the right not to be killed, come from, if not from calculating overall welfare or happiness?
Right. And why does a fair procedure, like that lottery, seem to make such a moral difference to many people? What makes the result seem okay if the process was agreed upon?
And perhaps the deepest question, what exactly is the moral power of consent? Why can an act of consent sometimes transform an act that would be deeply wrong, like taking a life into something that feels, at least to some, morally permissible?
These aren't just abstract puzzles for philosophers then. You mentioned they connect to real-world issues.
Absolutely. These dilemmas and the principles of consequentialism, categorical rights, consent, fairness, they run right through contemporary political and legal controversies. Things like debates over economic inequality, affirmative action, free speech versus hate speech, even things like military conscription.
So understanding Bentham and Kant isn't just history, it's relevant now.
Very much so. But engaging with this stuff, with moral philosophy, it's not always comfortable. There are risks involved.
Risks? Like what? Personal risks?
Yeah, personal risks. Philosophy, especially moral philosophy, is described in the course as an exercise in self-knowledge. But it can be unsettling because it confronts us with what we already know, or think we know, and makes it strange.
Takes the familiar and makes you question it.
Exactly. And once the familiar turns strange, it's never quite the same again. The lecturer calls this journey like lost innocence. What you learn, what you question, can never be unsought or unknown. In that sense, this whole exploration is really about you, about your own beliefs.
That's a little intimidating. Are there political risks, too?
Potentially, yes. There's an argument that philosophy, at least initially, may make you a worse citizen rather than a better one.
How could thinking about justice make you a worse citizen?
Because it's distancing, even debilitating activity. It pulls you away from the everyday flow, from conventions, from established assumptions, and from settled beliefs. You start questioning things everyone else takes for granted.
Like Socrates questioning the Athenians.
Precisely. The lecturer mentions Socrates' friend Callicles, who basically told Socrates to stop messing around with philosophy, calling it a pretty toy, and to abandon argument and get practical, maybe go to business school.
Huh. Some things never change, huh?
Right. So, faced with all these difficult questions, these competing principles, and the fact that brilliant people have debated them for centuries without final answers, it's really tempting to just throw up your hands.
Yeah, to fall into skepticism. To say, well, who are we to figure this out? It's all just opinion anyway.
Exactly. Skepticism seems like an easy out, a way to avoid the hard work of thinking through these conflicts.
But you're saying that's not really a solution.
Well, the course argues, channeling Kant again, that skepticism isn't a permanent answer. Kant called skepticism a resting place for human reason, a place to reflect. But it is no dwelling place for permanent settlement.
Why not? Why can't we just agree to disagree and leave it there?
Because the questions themselves are unavoidable. We can't escape them. As the lecturer puts it, we live some answer to these questions every day, whether we consciously think about it or not. Our actions, our laws, our social structures, they all embody answers to these moral questions.
So simply giving up on moral reflection.
It can never suffice to overcome the restlessness of reason. The questions keep coming back because they're inherent to being human and living together.
Wow, okay. So we've really journeyed through some deep waters today, from runaway trolleys to desperate sailors.
We've seen how our moral intuitions can shift dramatically depending on the situation, revealing that tension between consequentialist thinking, focusing on outcomes, and categorical thinking, focusing on rights and duties.
And we've explored those really thorny questions around necessity, consent, and fair procedures that the Dudley and Stevens case brought into such sharp relief. And I think the big takeaway, for me at least, is that this stuff, moral and political philosophy, it isn't just some dusty academic subject. It's as you said, a story that's profoundly about you.
About all of us. We live out answers to these unavoidable questions every single day, often without even realizing it.
So maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is this. What are the moral questions you find yourself living out day to day? And when the pressure's really on, when the stakes feel high, how do you actually answer them?